On behalf of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, I have the singular pleasure and honor of welcoming all of you to the 2021 Leadership Colloquium of the Honorable Minister in charge of Interior for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, congratulations on behalf of the entire team and everyone who has put this together, and the distinguished speakers and panelists, as well as other participants. I have this singular privilege of saying thank you very much for convening this year's edition of this program. Right now, we will get started with the anthem of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists and guests, special guests at this very event. May we also, at our various locations, please, we observe a 1 minute silence for the fallen heroes of the Federal Republic. Very quickly, we'll take about a minute. Yes, a minute of silence, please. Let's observe this in view of some of the recent fatalities that we've had among top government officials. Let's keep that in mind. A minute of silence, please. Please be seated. We thank you very much for that respectful observance. Thank you very much. Now, to get an introduction to this year's colloquium, the Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Colloquium 2021, please pay attention to this, a short video. Then, of course, after that, we'll take the introductions of those who are taking part officially in this particular event. a very warm applause, ladies and gentlemen, for that very incisive video. And I think it tells it all. Thank you very much to the Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola's team for putting that together. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Quite enlightening. And it speaks to the subject matter of this colloquium: government and big development, realities and solutions for Nigeria. Right now, we have more than 4,000 registrations for this particular year, Colloquium 2021. We have viewing right now from all over the world, online, on YouTube, on Zoom, and on Facebook. We're streaming this across various platforms, and you can all get it. So that tells you how important and how interesting the topic is and this colloquium has become. Of course, the title of this colloquium is Rauf Aregbesola Colloquium, and I've just inserted the word leadership. So it's now a Rauf Aregbesola Leadership Colloquium, because what Nigeria is really looking at right now is the leadership that will provide big development. Thank you. On behalf of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, I have the pleasure of welcoming everyone to this year's annual colloquium. My name is Bosin Amafai. I'm a TV anchor, and I also do a number of shows online as well. Thank you very much. Of course, this annual event discusses national and subnational issues with a view to advancing solutions in commemoration of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola's birthday. And of course, the theme for this year has been well advertised globally. Is government, big development, realities and solutions for Nigeria. The whole idea of what we'll do over the next 1.5 hours is to have solutions that are brought to the table, that are practicable and actionable. So we are very happy to have all of you. We have a whole lot of challenge, and we know these challenges: economic downturn, insecurity, tough times for the country, but we are in a position right now to get on the right track for a future that we want to deliver, managing the cost of government and delivering big development to the people. Now, let us get started. I would like to make a very few introductions, and please permit me to start with the chief convener and our chief host today, Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, who is the current Honorable Minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, of Interior of Nigeria. Before his federal appointment, he was the 4th civilian governor of the state of Osun and served 2 terms in office. Aregbesola was appointed as the Commissioner of Works and Infrastructure for Lagos State by Ahmed, who was then the governor of Lagos State, which included the supervision of the Public Works Corporation and Lagos State Electricity Board. Ogbeni Aregbesola not only saw a large investment in road infrastructure in Lagos State, but also delivered the master plan that served as a basis for the infrastructural development and expansion that was seen in Lagos, even after Ahmed left office. Please, a round of applause for our chief convener today. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also please quickly and recognize our distinguished guest and keynote address speaker at today's event. Is none other than His Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, GCON. Of course, he's a renowned legal practitioner, a senior advocate of Nigeria, SAN, and a politician of repute who is currently serving as the #2 citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I have the singular honor and privilege of saying good morning, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for being on the show with us this morning. Let me also say a very big thank you and recognize other special guests, speakers, and panelists. Of course, the Honorable Minister of Finance of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Her Excellency Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, who is a professional accountant and has been serving as the Minister of Finance, Budget, and National Planning since 2019. At the time, President Muhammad Buhari brought 2 ministries under a single office and making her the de facto minister of the Nigerian economy. An accountant by profession and a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from ABU Zaria and a Master's in Business Administration. Mrs. Ahmed was appointed as Minister of Finance on the 14th of September 2018. In 2015, she was appointed as the Minister of Budget, State for Budget, and National Planning by President Muhammadu Buhari. A warm welcome to you, Honorable Minister of Finance. Thank you very much for making it on the program. Next, recognizing Mallam Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai is Executive Governor of Kaduna State since 2015. He was previously the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory from 2003 to 2007 and the Director of the Bureau of Public Enterprises, the BPE. He is the founding member of the ruling All Progressive Congress. In 1982, Madam Nasir El-Rufai founded El-Rufai and Partners, which is a quantity surveying consulting firm with 3 partners, which he managed until 1998. In addition to his practice, Madam Nasir El-Rufai held management positions with 2 international telecommunications companies, AT&T Networks International BV and Motorola Incorporated. Your Excellency, thank you very much for being on this colloquium this morning. We appreciate your time. Next on my list is Dr. Yemi Kale. He's the Statistician General of the National Bureau of Statistics. Kale assumed office in 2011 and was reappointed in 2016, making him the first CEO in the agency's history to serve 2 terms as a Statistician General. But before he joined the NBS, Dr. Kale acted as a special advisor to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of National Planning, as well as Group Head of Research and Strategy at Investment Banking and Trust Company, now Stanbic IBTC. In addition, Kale is a member of the World Economics Association, the UK Royal Economic Society, and a fellow of the UK Royal Statistical Society, among other such professional bodies. Kale was awarded the National Productivity Order of Merit for outstanding performance, professionalism, and diligence in February 2017 by the President, Muhammadu Buhari himself. Next on my list, thank you very much, Dr. Kale, for coming. My list, Comrade Ayuba Waba, MNI, current President, Nigerian Labour Congress. Previous appointments, of course, he was the President of the National Union of Health Technology Students, the State Secretary, Medical and Health Workers Union, State Chairman, Medical and Health Workers Union, Chairman, Nigerian Labour Congress, Borno State Council, National President, Medical and Health Workers Union, and National Treasurer of the Nigerian Labour Congress, the Chairman of the Joint Health Sectors Unions, and Chairperson, West African Health Sector Unions Network. Thank you very much, Comrade Ayuba. We are privileged to have you at the Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Colloquium 2021. I'm also recognizing a member of my panelists and special speaker as well, Professor Tunji Olapa, a Nigerian political scientist and public administrator, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Ibadan School of Government and Public Policy in Bodija, and also a Professor of Public Policy at the Lead University, also in Ibadan, the Oyo State capital. Mr. Olapa was the Chief Research Officer, Policy Analyst, and Speechwriter at the State House in Abuja. He was the Assistant Director and Secretary of the White Paper Panel for Nigeria's 1995 AJIDA Public Service Reform, where he was responsible for the implementation of that reform. He rose to the position of the Permanent Secretary of the Nigerian Civil Service and served in that capacity at the State House Abuja. He established the Ibadan School of Government and Public Policy in 2016 after his retirement from the civil service. Professor Olapa, good morning. Thank you very much. And it's a privilege having you on the show tonight, this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, we appreciate it. Of course, the final panel member of my panel this morning is Mr. Oluseun Onigbide. He's a Nigerian entrepreneur and open data analyst, popularly known as the co-founder and CEO of Budget Nigeria, a Nigerian civic startup. Oluseun Onigbide is a fiscal transparency advocate and firm believer in the power of what you call open data. He was awarded the Future Awards Prize for Science and Tech Innovation. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate all of you, having all of you here on this colloquium. Let me make a very quick recognition as well for members of the press who are also invited to be here. My colleagues, Jude Egbers of the Post newspaper, Wale Odunsi of the Daily Post newspaper, Simon Kolawole, you also recognize of the Cable, and Idris from Premium Times, Dotun Oladepo of Eagle Online and the President, Guild of Corporate Online Publishers, Shemi Okunlawan, who is MP of MPO Reports, and of course, Debo Adesina, the editor-in-chief of the Guardian newspapers. I thank you all, as well as other panelists and speakers that will be recognized in the course of this event. Now, let's get the show started. Right now, I have the singular pleasure and honor of inviting the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, to give us the keynote speech at this event and raise the curtain on the 2021 edition of the Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Leadership Colloquium. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you very much, Bobson. Thank you. Your Excellency, the Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, our host and celebrant, the Honorable Minister of Interior, Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, Chairman, Nigeria Labour Congress, Comrade Aliu Waba, and all of the co-participants, friends and colleagues, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I believe I left out the Honorable Minister of Finance, Honorable Minister of Finance, Zainab, Ahmed, and all of our guests and friends present. I'm pleased to be here for three reasons. The first is that it's an event to celebrate the birthday of my dear brother and friend, co-traveler and co-participant in the journey of developing Africa's largest economy and what he likes to refer to as the greatest hope of the Black race, Nigeria. The second is that this colloquium keeps up an important tradition of our political persuasion, which we refer to loosely as a progressive tendency. By using the opportunity of birthdays and other special anniversaries of our leaders to engage in public conversations on matters of development and matters of public interest. The third is the importance of the subject of the colloquium, which is government and big development, which I believe calls for some interrogation of the role of government in the major aspects of the economy and development. Or the answer for us to the question where we should be between pro-state and pro-market ideologies. And really, you know, although some of these arguments might appear to be dated, it appears that almost always, just in trying to find our place in the spectrum, we have to somewhat redefine our position and find, you know, where we are exactly. The collapse of socialism in the early 90s initially led to some triumphalism on the part of free market ideologues and exponentially advancing the notion that markets were the ultimate tool for the economic success of nations. So structural adjustment, and many of us remember the structural adjustment programs introduced in many developing countries, and especially in Africa, at the core of which was cutting back on government expenditure, became the cornerstone of what was then described as the Washington Consensus on the desired macroeconomic framework that would create a truly global economy fueled by market forces. But rather than grow the economies of the poor and indebted countries to which the SAPs were applied, poverty grew and development was stultified. And with the spectacular failure of the SAPs, the World Bank, formally abandoned structural adjustment and replaced it with what they described then as the Comprehensive Development Framework. As a matter of fact, on one occasion, the managing director of the IMF at that time, Michael Kamadesos, declared that henceforth the fund would put poverty reduction at the center of its programs. This new paradigm, beg your pardon, involved increased and more effective fiscal expenditures for poverty reduction with better targeting of budgetary resources, especially on social priorities in basic education and health. I've taken us on this short history of the tensions between the dominant political economies, because the choices we in developing countries are called upon to make today require us to make more or less the same judgments, especially the need to prioritize human capital development and poverty reduction. Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, as many of us who are his friends know, is a repentant socialist, or perhaps why is a repentant Marxist. And I want to repeat repentant, not unrepentant. Repentant because in many ways he has repented from some of his very, very strongly held Marxist views. But I think that he stands out. I mean, I think he as an individual stands out as a reason why one should at least have some socialist blood in them, while recognizing the fundamental role of markets and the public sector. Osun State, which Ogbeni governed for 8 years, received the lowest, I think the lowest but one or so, in federal allocations, but was for those years the state with the lowest poverty rate. The incidence of poverty for the state of Osun was, I think, 10.9% in 2017, as against 37.5% in 2010. A sharp drop in the incidence of poverty between the period 2010 and 2018, As of early 2020, the incidence of poverty has fallen further to 8.2%. But why would a state with one of the least revenues record the lowest levels of poverty? I think, to a large extent, it is arguable that the social intervention policies which he initiated then and implemented were largely responsible. The state launched several job creation efforts. Osun State Youth Empowerment Program, which hired about 20,000 young people. There was also the school feeding program, the precursor of the National School Feeding Program, which served 155,000 children at inception and almost 250,000 in all of the over 1,300 public elementary schools in the state at the time. 7,000 jobs were directly created, and there were about, I think, almost 3,700 cooks, and most of them, or perhaps all of them, were women. The program led to an increase of 60% in primary school enrollment, and of course, all meals were served, from the home. Because it's a homegrown school feeding program, the farms and other farms and other suppliers of food items, of course, benefited immensely from the supplies that were made to that program. Some of these programs, as I said, were precursors to the investment programs of the Buhari administration. And I want to emphasize this point because social investment programs, obviously are important, especially in a country such as ours, with very, very high levels of poverty. Now, with the levels of poverty that we have, we're told that the average annual income of in Nigeria, I think, is about 137,000 naira or something like that. For the poorest, not the average annual income. So poverty, I think, is seen as those who are earning below that, from that point and below. But 137,000 naira, of course, comes to something like 11,000 perhaps, or 12,000, close to 12,000 per month. So clearly, you cannot have that kind of situation without looking at some kind of intervention. Obviously, there are those who will argue that the best approach to this will be to enable business, and we'll talk about this in a moment, and enable industry in such a way that the growth of business and industry will eventually mop up or create opportunities for jobs and mop up a lot of those who have no opportunities, those who have no jobs, and provide means of income. And of course, by such means, reduce poverty. But I think the basic problem with this trickle-down approach is that it just has not been found to work effectively or quickly enough. And we find that in very many cases, poverty continues to rise. So direct state intervention, government intervention is crucial. And I'll come to the question of financing government intervention in a moment. But as I was saying about the administration of Rauf Aregbesola, indeed, it was, as I said, a lot of those programs were precursors to the investment programs of the Buhari administration. In our first budget, we devoted 500 billion to our social development program. 500,000 young graduates were engaged in the Empower program, and 9.5 million children are being fed daily in the school feeding programs just before COVID across 34 states. I believe that has gone, that is probably higher now. The program employs well over 135,000 cooks and over 100,000 smallholder farmers linked to the program, supplying locally sourced ingredients. At some point, this translated to about 594 cattle, 138,000 chickens, 6.8 million eggs, 83 metric tons of fish that are procured, prepared, and distributed every week. Now, of course, the higher outcomes for enrollment of pupils in school retention and performance of students have been empirically verified, and I won't go into all of that. There was also the Government Enterprises and Promotion Program, the Trader Money, Market Money initiatives, where microcredit was offered to traders, about 2 million traders in all. And of course, there was also the farmer money and several of these microcredit programs. And I think that these programs are important because they, in many ways, were government's efforts at directly creating opportunities. A country such as ours clearly requires a social welfare program. We clearly require a situation where those who cannot work and those who have no work and of course the vulnerable are provided with some way of earning something and are provided with opportunities. Of course, the question that always arises is, how will this be funded? How will you provide, how will you, make money available for these purposes? We have, of course, since the inception of this administration, we've done quite a few other direct social investment type things aimed particularly at human capital development. After the National Health Act was passed in 2014, the federal government in 2018 began including the 1% minimum portion of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, amounting to about 55 billion, to fund basic health care. The fund is designed to deliver a guaranteed set of health services to all Nigerians through the network of primary healthcare centers. Since 2015 also, the federal government has disbursed more than 170 billion in matching grants to states and the FCT under the UBE program, the Universal Basic Education Program. 8 billion naira in special funding grants to states and private providers of special education, and 34 billion naira from the Teachers Professional Development Fund to states and the FCT. There's also, of course, as you know, the commitment of the administration to lifting 100 million people out of poverty. Of course, because we recognize the threats posed by social immobility and by the deprivation of a permanent underclass. Now, the point, of course, is that for many of the challenges that face a developing economy, and for many of the challenges that face poorer countries, there is very little immediate term profit for private actors in addressing those challenges. But of course, we know that there are huge long-term social and economic gains to be reaped. In order to fill that gap, government must come in, government must intervene. And it is this intervention it is intervention, in my view, in the big development issues, the issues of big development. And my view is that these issues are issues of human capital development. How do you educate the largest population, the largest youth population in Africa, and possibly very soon might be one of the 3 largest youth populations in the world? How do you ensure healthcare for that large number of people? And all of the various issues. These, I believe, are the big development issues that confront us, and we must be able to find solutions to them. It was there's this author who wrote about the entrepreneurial state. I cannot remember his name at the moment. And one of the issues that he was talking about is that we must that the entrepreneurial state is not is a state that allows and opens up opportunities for the entrepreneur, but at the same time does not subscribe to the myth that there is some kind of a conflict between public funding and private sector interventions, and that myth is not. And that myth that we should not give too much premium to that myth. And I agree entirely that there is clearly a place there's clearly a place for public sector intervention, and in our types of economies, that place is particularly is massive. Now, I just want to talk a bit about financing these types of interventions. Now, if you look at our situation, I think that in many ways, policymakers in our country, and of course in many developing countries, are tied to these whole issues of trying to ensure that we have a balanced budget. We're focused on budget deficits. Everyone is, riled up about debts and all of that. Now, I want to say that, of course, it's important for us to pay attention to the debt burden. It's very crucial that we pay attention to it. But I think more attention should be paid to the question of what we are spending our debt on, and whether, even if in the short term, our debt it creates a burden, whether it yields the types of long-term benefits that will make sense for our economy going into the future. I think that that's a very important consideration. I think that balance is always important. In our case, of course, we have a revenue problem, as they say, probably not directly a debt problem. In other words, we're not generating as much revenue as we should, which speaks to the issues we have with inadequate domestic resource mobilization, and mainly, and of course, creating an environment that would enable business to flourish in such a way that we're able to provide opportunities and, of course, revenues for government as well. So we have those challenges. But one of the things that I would like to say is that we must keep our focus on the people. We must keep our focus on how to ensure that we're able to provide as much opportunities as possible for the people. Now, that's two things. The first is in the direct interventions that we're talking about. And I want to say, and I agree with that, there's also, I'm sure that some of us have come across the book by Stephanie Kelton, where she was talking of the deficit myth, where for an issue of currency such as ourselves, we mustn't always reason as if we're a family or an individual. So the individual, for example, is, of course, anxious to ensure that they spend only what they earn. In the case, of course, of nations, we must go beyond spending what we earn, inevitably, which, of course, is what results in deficits. Of course, we're different from a currency issuer such as the United States of America, which issues dollars. I mean, it's a totally different set of circumstances. But I think that the use of ways and means for providing social welfare, the use of ways and means for providing succor, is something that we ought to do intentionally, but we ought to do with proper modeling. Of course, we should model how will this impact inflation? How would it impact, the other indices of growth and all of that, the other macroeconomic indices rather? How would it impact those things? But I think it's important for us to recognize that we cannot be embarrassed about the use of ways and means, especially for major government social welfare programs. I don't think we should be. I, for example, believe that we should be doing something in the order of about 1 million direct jobs now, and paying for those direct jobs as we paid for the Empower program. We should, and we should make the provisions for doing so, because we have an emergency, and we should be able to make those provisions. But secondly, we must also open up the place for business. At the moment, business is stultified because the environment simply is not optimal for doing business. And I think that we must create that optimal environment. a lot of our agencies, customs, NAFDAC, and a lot of these agencies see their roles as the roles of police, as policemen or women, and also as persons who are charged with revenue generation, as opposed to trade facilitation or business facilitation. And I think it's important for these agencies to get the right orientation, which is part of the work we're doing at the PEBEC with the Presidential Enabling Business Council. I think, I believe that opening up the space for business, further reducing taxes, so that businesses can access, so that businesses, more investments can come in. Fixing our foreign exchange problems. One of the major problems today is really the fact that with the kinds of exchange rate arbitrage that is possible, this kind of exchange rate differentials, it's difficult for people, for dollars to come into the country. It's difficult, of course, for investments to come into the country. Who would bring in their money at an exchange rate, at an official exchange rate, which is about 60, 70 naira away from what market, or if you like, the parallel market is saying. So we need to fix the exchange rate situation in order to be able to attract investments. And of course, as I said, fixing the business environment itself, because ultimately, the drivers of this economy will be the entrepreneurial abilities of the Nigerian people, where we must release that. People want to work, they want to invest, but the environment has to be right for doing so. So I think I'll just end my comments there. I meant to speak for only 10 minutes. I think I've exceeded that by a bit. So I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words, and I hope that we'll all have an interesting conversation. I see so many different people who will be, so many different ideas already, but just by looking at the faces of people who are here. So we look forward to the interactions later on. Thank you very much.
We thank you very much, Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. Thank you very much for that very incisive and curtain-raising comments on what the government is doing. If you permit me, Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President, I have just about 2 questions for you. If you permit me to go ahead. The first speaks to managing the costs of governance. You spoke extensively, Mr. Vice President, on the side of what you were doing and the needability of those interventions on social investment, on big infrastructure, as well as providing jobs and being directly responsible. We appreciate that very much. The flip side of that is managing the cost of governance, both at the federal and the subnational levels. That's my first question. If you permit me to take the second one very quickly, and this came online from one of the email of a pre-registered one of attendees. Quite a big question, but I'll try to summarize it. How can government and the civil society work together in ways that inspire trust and respect the civil service, or what you call the private sector independence? This from Oyebisi Babatunde Oluseyi, who is the Executive Director at Nigerian Network of NGOs. The second question, how can government and the civil society, whether it is the labor union, whether it is the Market Women Association, work together in a way that inspire trust, respect, and deliver big development? Those are the 2 questions for you, Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much, Bofsin. Thank you. I think to the first question about the cost of governance. Frankly, I believe that, of course, there are many aspects of governance that are too expensive and that we could cut down. But I would rather focus on on some of the issues around people being in the right place in the public service. So we have a large public service, but you still have huge shortages in, for example, healthcare, huge shortages, teachers, huge shortages of well-trained teachers, massive shortages, So there are massive shortages in many parts of the public service, if you like, whereas you find redundancies in other aspects of the public service. So for me, I think that an important part of what we should be doing is in not necessarily just looking at the cost, because I think the more important thing is what is the function of the public service and what should it be doing? So we should be engaging more teachers, we should be engaging more nurses, training and engaging more nurses and doctors and several other participants in the public service in that way. And we may end up with more or less the same cost. But my view is that those costs themselves, so long as we're spending them right, so long as they are spent on the right quality of public servants, are costs that we should bear. I'm not certain that just a willy-nilly cost cutting is the solution long term. Of course, we must be able. So for example, we find within the public service there are so many who are not qualified, many who are whose jobs are replicated, huge redundancies. We need to correct those redundancies. We need to ensure that those who are not qualified, are either retrained or we let them go. But we must ensure that we do not allow ourselves to be trapped in a way of thinking that suggests that the problem is really just the cost of governance, so that if we just downsize, everything will be all right. I don't think that. I think the problem is a bit larger than that. I think we have to look at really the professionalization of our public service, ensuring that they are right fits, ensuring that we have the right quality of people in the right jobs. Here now you have an overweight, if you look at administrative services, people who are just basically in some administrative cadre or the other. They are far in excess of what is required there. But then there are areas of the public service that require competent hands and have huge shortages of those competent hands. So I think we should look at that as a balance. The other, to the question about how the public service, how civil society, government, and the private sector can work together in relationships that are mutually reinforcing and respectful. I think that that's an aspiration of at least those of us in government. Many of us would like to see a lot more cooperation, a lot more collaboration. But the platforms for doing so have to be deliberately created. We have to create those platforms. You will find that in many of the government programs, you'll find that there is a deliberate attempt to create a platform for private sector intervention, of what private sector and even civil society. If you look at the social investment programs, for example, a lot of work was done with civil society, not just in conceptualizing the programs, but also in monitoring the programs. And if you look at our efforts with the economy, you'll find that there is a deliberate attempt to bring in the private sector through various programs. For example, funding of our infrastructure projects. We have a lot of tax credit schemes and schemes that can encourage and bring in the private sector. And then forums for interaction. PEBEC is one where we have forums for interaction with the private sector. We also have the Industrial Council, our Industrial and Competitiveness Council, although we haven't held our meetings in a while. But these are platforms that we hope we'll be able to bring in the private sector. So I think that deliberately creating those platforms is an important thing to do, and I believe that that is the role of government, and in some ways also the role of civil society and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellency. the number 2 citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. Thank you very much for your time and those incisive comments on the state of the economy and what we need to do. Well, I appreciate it, Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President. If you stick around for a few more minutes and drop in if we have at least 1 or 2 more questions for you to speak to, we'll really, really appreciate that at this colloquium. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce my panelists at this 2021 Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Colloquium 2021. My panelists, let me start by calling on Dr. Yemi Kale, who is a member of the, Dr. Yemi Kale is the Statistician General and the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics. He will be speaking alongside the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab, Ahmed, also alongside His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Governor El-Rufai, as well as Comrade Ayuba Waba, MNI, the President of the Nigerian Labour Congress, as well as Professor Laokpa, and of course, Oluseun Onigbede of Budget. Now, let me start with giving the floor for 10 minutes to Dr. Yemi Kale, the CEO of MBS and the Statistician General of the Federal Republic, to please speak to us on this particular colloquium, the role of data and what we need to know to use big data for big development. Dr. Kale, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Bosan. And I want to start by acknowledging His Excellency, the Vice President, and also to thank the Honorable Minister of the Interior for inviting me to this very important conversation. I want to start by saying that as we all know, the definition of development differs across different countries. And of course, your focus on development will determine determine your strategy, which is also determine what you target, which is also determine what you track. But I believe that despite the different definition of development across the world, I think most people agree that it includes some form of systems involving physical and institutional infrastructure that defines what we see as a modern economy. So you have things that include some form of productivity-driven economic growth, institutional development and growth, some form of improvement in administrative procedures, which are designed in accordance to some rules and procedures that make sense. And at the same time, targeted measures to enhance welfare of individuals in the country. The issues of equality, of social protection, poverty, and so on, which is what His Excellency the Vice President was talking about, and which we are currently doing at the federal level and was done in Osun State. Now, all this, as we know, require a huge amount of capital. And of course, while those some would require a lot more capital than others, for example, the need for significant physical infrastructure just will cost a lot more money than and require a bigger push than other items like the reforms required for administrative procedures, institutional arrangements, and so on. But the big question there is, which do you do first? In a system where you do not have enough capital to do everything in terms of development, what do you do first? Or even if you're going to do both, what do you put more focus on because of those capital requirements? I believe that for a country like Nigeria, and that's my opinion, it's probably easier to focus more on the development issues involving things like social protection, poverty, and so on, administrative procedures, institutional arrangements, as opposed to physical infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying that physical infrastructure should be ignored. I'm just saying in terms of where you put your focus. That's because of the huge capital requirement and the huge infrastructure gap, for example, that you have in Nigeria. Otherwise, you have a situation where you run the risk of entering a debt or a trap. So this conversation about what the focus should be, or the sequence, what do we do first, or how do we do it as far as pushing development, is one I think we have not fully agreed on as a country, given the way our economy and our country is currently structured. The role of the private sector as well. Now, government is definitely, while government is not expected, I don't believe government is expected to provide all those services that are required to lead development. A country like Nigeria can't even afford it. We don't have enough revenue. We don't collect, rather. We do generate enough revenues, but we don't collect enough revenues to be able to pay for all the development outcomes. So obviously, the private sector has a role to play, and this is where the government's role in ensuring that the environment is created to allow the private sector to play its role becomes extremely important. An environment that requires a coherent array of consistent, predictable, legitimate institutional arrangements that make the system work I think that is where, in addition to providing some of the social protection issues, where government, the public sector's role should also lie. Getting this complex array of factors working simultaneously between the government and private sector, I think it's where that's where the key is. Now, you need your sustainable, consistent economic growth, because that's where the revenues are going to be generated to pay for this, to get the capital to pay for all these things. And the reason why you track your economic growth is that as your economy grows, there's more money in the hands of businesses and individuals, and they're supposed to pay their taxes. And of course, when you say an economy has grown, it means that they are producing more, they are spending more in the economy than they did previously, and governments are supposed to collect more money from that process, and that's the whole process of pushing economic growth. Now, economic growth, like I said, is where your capital comes from. But like I said, it's also where you're going to expand the economy in terms of jobs, reduce poverty as well, and things of that nature. The issues of keeping faith with reforms is also very key for development. Unlike economic growth, I think development is not instantaneous. So you have a situation where for you to see the benefits of development, it takes a lot more time. So keeping faith with reforms, ensuring that you are consistent in your approach and your direction, and again, measuring that progress is extremely important. This is where the importance of data in measuring development in the outcomes matter. I've always said that most of the problems and challenges we face as a country cannot be solved without first looking at the data. It is data that will tell you which state has more of an unemployment problem, which state needs more social protection than the other. You cannot solve almost any problem in the country without looking at data. The data basically tells you exactly what the problems are, what the causes of the problems are, and it's the data that will help you to design those policies, projects, and programs to tackle that problem that has been identified by the data. By looking at that data, you know what the problem is. You design your policies based on evidence, and then you measure the consequences or the results of implementing that policy over time, so that if you have a situation where the policy is not working, you can tweak it on time. And I think because there's a direct relationship between countries that take their data seriously and how well they develop, how quickly and how well they have developed their economy. When you look at the current situation in Nigeria, picking just a few development indicators, gross domestic product per capita, inflation, unemployment, poverty, infant mortality rate, foreign direct investment, and compare to other countries, it shows us the state where we are as far as development is concerned. And it is from looking at this data that you can start to build, and that you can start to ensure that you get to the next step. You set targets and you get to the next steps. And then and it's from that data as well that you are able to better evaluate the success or failure of whatever policy or program, development policy, program, or project that you have introduced. Without doing that, you find a situation where you have introduced a development strategy, and after 10 years, 15 years, you find that you just wasted a lot of capital, you waste a lot of energy, a lot of time, and it wasn't working. This is why, like I said, I believe that the first stage in any development strategy is first to look at the data. What is the data saying? and then you develop your policies and plans in line with what the data is saying, and then you measure that progress by looking at the data. I think I've gone beyond my 10 minutes, so I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yemi Kale, the Statistician General, and of course the CEO of the Nigerian National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you very much. I picked up three important points. First, big development does not happen overnight, so it's not instantaneous. We need to be patient here. So patience is needed. Number two, we need to be consistent with our policies and reforms and actions. And number three, we need to measure. You can't change what you don't measure. The first thing is to measure. So, and that is where your office came in. Thank you very much. We've seen the impact of what you are doing. We appreciate our participants here in Nigeria and around the world who are viewing this across the various platforms on Zoom, on YouTube and other platforms. We appreciate your questions that you're sending through. We'll push them to the panelists as we move on. But we'd like to hear from every member of the panel. So let me now move on to the second speaker on the panel. And I'm going to respectfully ask that we have His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Governor El-Rufai, to please join the conversation. Now you have the floor to deliver your address. Thank you very much, Dr. Yemi Kale. Now I have the pleasure of inviting His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, to please take the floor as the second speaker on this panel for the Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Colloquium 2021. Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State. Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, Your Excellency, please. Okay, if you permit me, while we get the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, to connect to us on this colloquium. He was there at the opening a little while ago. Let me invite the Professor Olapa to speak to us. Professor, you have a very, Olapa, Executive Vice Chairman by the School of Government and Public Policy. Let's hear from you, Professor Olapa, first, then we'll come back to. Yes, you have
Thank you very much.
You have 10 minutes.
The moderator. I hope you are hearing me.
Yes, loud and clear, please. Go ahead, Professor.
So, my entry point into this conversation will be to take a cursory look at the whole policy and program implementation minefield, which indeed narrows down to two solution frameworks. One, the public institution implementation capability readiness to deliver big development, and the entire national productivity culture. That's to say that Nigeria has never been lacking in the capacity to craft visions and plans. The issue has always been execution, the capacity and the capability to move from governance to performance and to outcome. So Nigeria issue is really about getting things done. And in this, my thesis is that the devil of Nigeria's perpetual transition of an all-motion, no movement type lies in the details. That's the nut and bolt of implementation and public public service capability readiness. Up front, I'd like to contribute to the conversation started by His Excellency, the Vice President, that the issue is not the humongous and unsustainable cost of governance, but the return on most of government investment, which speaks to the whole notion of the productivity of the economy. So I will proceed by saying that by taking government and big development to mean state or government prepared massive development leap that creates sufficient momentum that is capable of creating desirable multiplier effects that deliver national transformation. And in macroeconomic terms, it is an optimistic scenario of development possibility which delivers inclusive double-digit growth through game-changing, sustainable, value-adding contribution of the critical growth propelling sectors and growth drivers in the economy. In order to get a handle and understand this properly, in development discourse, we would, and whenever we discuss big development aspirational journey of countries, we are wont to, reference the Asian tigers, the likes of Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. And a useful perspective that characterizes their development leap is the notion of democratic developmental state. So that thesis assumes, one, that government is capable of getting a macroeconomic handle on the role of the state relative to the market. That is to say that if the private sector will be the engine of growth of the economy, the role of the state needs to be redefined and recalibrated around its core and non-core function as a basis for massive restructuring in order to be able to launch new business model that would develop that development. The second is that we assume that there is capacity in the government to craft a compelling national development agenda plan matched with smart implementation strategy to mobilize all sectors of the economy to implement it. So for me, why crafting of national vision and development plan has never been a Nigerian problem. The issue is execution, which suggests that government haven't crafted a compelling agenda, has mustered the political will to transcend parochialism in assembling the cabinet and the policy program delivery team by giving concession to technical rationalism and less of politics in constituting change and transformation too. In turn, suggests that tested hand with high-end expertise will be strategically located to make real impact in the critical pressure points that will ignite calculated multiplier effect that will deliver the transformation. The dynamic will demand disciplined implementation by consistently focusing on target, performance data, and feedback. This will in turn require leadership to successfully control the constraining factor, which is usually the problem that implementers face in the trenches, the whole Nigerian factor. So in moving to solution, I would say that moving from governance promise to timely delivery in a democratic but complex Nigerian space, the first challenge that every government faces is the problem of timing. Time. 4 years tenure is always a limiting factor, except for outlier performance. Consequently, the critical question that every president, every governor, every minister, or that must undertake a big development transformation journey, that the question to ask is, what type of changes can be realistically achieved in 4 years that will bring government promise to the point of efficient services delivered effectively to Nigerians? And achieving policy and development target entail moving from policy design to policy intelligence and creative implementation. And two issues should worry such a transformational leader. One relates to the issue of what needs to urgently change in the way the business of government is managed. And this question flows from the fact that we cannot expect any significant changes if we keep doing things the same way that has refused to yield any worthwhile results in the past. So if MDAs are therefore at the heart of policy implementation and service delivery, our change management strategy must take account of bureaucratology with reform to calibrate the delivery and business model that has once capacitated public institutions and deliver timely results. And if MDA's capacitation is a long-term thing, then selective institutional capacitation through reform that prioritize certain set of public institutions that will be at the forefront of the transformation journey will be a smart option. The public institution to be targeted for capacitation falls into three categories: MDAs that implement national priority programs, public institutions that regulate rules-based market players, and the institutions that facilitate welfare-oriented social impact services. Mr. Moderator, the last proposal I want to make, which is the second priority track, is the need to institute a new productivity paradigm in the national economy. Given the numerous references to fiscal crisis, cost of governance, the compelling need for current plans to emphasize enhanced productivity containing the cost of government will always remain an issue. The policy of imperative here will be to launch a national waste reduction strategy through getting critical sectors of the economy to articulate productivity plans based on agreed national benchmark. Apart from a strategic integration of these plans and targets into the National Development Plan, the launch of productivity metrics and to revise collective bargaining and current labor approach to negotiation. And of course, the benchmarking of capital overhead and personnel costs will be an irreducible critical success factor. With respect to execution capacity of public institutions and compelling need to beef up the public service capability readiness, the objective and strategy should include setting the public service on productivity curve through baseline productivity audit to free resources for development, ensure efficient use of resources, and reducing redundancy. Structural overhaul of planning, programming, and budgeting system to build performance-oriented systems that help public managers to build their policy intelligence, enhance service quality with focus on accountability for results, with the challenge of poor data culture addressed. Then MDAs will need to be thoroughly re-engineered through changes in their operation and processes to embrace project management culture and strategic PPP leverage. Job evaluation, targeting skills, recomposition, regrading new pay structure, and the rethinking of intellectual content of skills of public servants for running government. Heavy investment on capacity development underpinned by professionalized human resource function and meritocracy to revise the current operation of federal character and to redress public service dysfunctional physical environment, facility management, and layout to ensure that they drive productivity. Lastly, at the level of intergovernmental coordination for effective service delivery, especially to deliver the concurrent schedule of function, without prejudice to the need to reestablish critical departments, solution will require a more comprehensive look at the entire institutional architecture that run our federalism, to include strengthening of the national councils of the sectors, National Economic Council itself, the Joint Planning Board, and the Federal Secretariat. Maybe I might want to stop at that for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We appreciate those very incisive points going to what needs to be done, the results, what needs to be some of the points that we need to take on board. Thank you very much, Professor Tunji Alapa, for bringing some solutions to the table. Of course, it's very important that we harvest all these thoughts together, this leadership colloquium of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola. Thank you very much, Professor Tunji Alapa, Executive Vice Chairman of the School of Government and Public Policy. Thank you for your thoughts. Let's move on very quickly, saving more of our time, to invite His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, to please take the floor as the next panelist on my rundown. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Moderator. Your Excellencies, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to felicitate with Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola on his birthday. I participated in this colloquium last year, and I'm pleased to join other compatriots to celebrate him today. He's a great man by any standard. It is appropriate that on his birthday we'll be discussing issues like this that confront our country and brainstorm on ideas to move the nation forward. That's what he always stood for. He's exhibited it in his leadership opportunities in Lagos, in Osun, and now at the national level. Our country is facing serious problems. Economic, social fabric is being stretched. Insecurity is widespread and at its peak in many ways. And people are becoming despondent. Big ideas, innovative ideas, new approaches to solving problems are needed if Nigeria is to survive the present and prepare for the future. In the presentation earlier, it was said that Nigeria would have a population of about 500 million by the year 2050. That's not very far from today. What are we doing now to ensure that that population explosion results into a demographic dividend instead of a demographic disaster? And it would be a disaster if we don't do something. So I want to thank Ogbeni for convening this and for us to talk about this. I think our country is sitting on a fiscal cliff edge. Public revenues are falling. NNPC's oil revenues are almost entirely devoted to funding petrol price subsidy, leaving little or nothing to contribute to the Federation account. Indeed, NNPC warned the governors, the state governors, that in May and June, they are likely to come to Federation account with zero contribution. Most of what we are sharing is from contributions from Federal Inland Revenue Service, Customs, and other MDS collecting revenues. Tax revenues at federal and state levels at not more than 7% of GDP are considerably lower than of any country in the world. And even the African average is about 20%. We are still doing 6 to 7% of GDP. The federal government is severely indebted. Nearly 100% of federal government revenues go towards debt service. The federal government is also maintaining an over-bloated public service, which, in spite of its size, is limited in its ability to sufficiently fund the mandates for security and infrastructure. For instance, in the year 2020, the federal government budget for roads was about 200 billion, but over 800 billion naira was spent on fuel subsidy the same year. Clearly, these numbers show what our priorities are. We are more interested in funding fuel subsidy than building roads. Each one of us knows what we'll do in our private capacities when our incomes reduce or even stay stagnant. We'll most likely respond by cutting our expenses while seeking other ways to enhance our incomes. That's what everyone will do when faced with the situation that Nigeria is facing. Neither of these coping mechanisms is evident so far in our national response. It appears that a significant section of our political and economic elite is of the view that the revenue crisis does not require any serious or concerted action. As if this country can behave like the ostrich and just muddle through, while the problems will resolve themselves and the good times will return without any effort. I believe very strongly, and I have no doubt, that we cannot leave our fiscal problems to chance or wishful thinking. Government must trim its costs and focus on security, infrastructure, and economic competitiveness. This is why this colloquium focusing on reducing cost of governance is so important. Now, I will be very specific because I have just a few minutes. How do we reduce the cost of governance? Reducing the cost of governance at federal, state, and local government levels can be achieved through the following measures. The first is revenue enhancement and waste reduction. We must forge national consensus now to implement policies that will create more fiscal space for federal and state governments to be viable. This means we must broaden the tax net and consider raising value-added tax to between 15 and 20%. Most of the countries in the West Africa sub-region and most countries in the world have VATs that range in that or even more. Second, again, to enhance revenues and reduce waste, we should stop pretending that the regulated levels of bank lending interest, exchange rates, prices of petrol, prices of electricity, and even the salaries of the public sector are realistic, sustainable, and will lead us to the promised land. They won't. Our lending rates are too high. Our exchange rate is too unstable. The prices of petrol and electricity are below the cost of production. And the salaries in the public sector are unrealistically low, pushing many otherwise honest public servants into corruption. No country can perform better than the quality of its public service. And we don't pay our public servants enough. We must find a solution to that. The other measure to take is one of enhancing the efficiency of the public sector itself. We must, and here I disagree with His Excellency the Vice President, we must right-size the governments at federal, states, and local government levels based on non-oil tax revenues affordability through the merger of MDAs. I do not think you should have a government larger than the taxes you're able to raise in your state or at the federal level. Let us use these oil revenues, this windfall that will not last forever, for investment into the future of Nigeria. Let's use all of that revenue for capital. Let's not use it for salaries. Everyone should pay his salaries through taxes. And I think we should merge MDAs with similar mandates and functions. And we should also impose a nationwide freeze on the creation of any new administrative, regulatory, or executive bodies for the foreseeable future. The federal government has more than 700 MDAs, some of them duplicating functions, people doing little or nothing. They are being paid poorly because there are too many. If there are few, maybe we have a window to enhance the salaries and allowances of public servants. Which brings me to the next issue. Staff quality is more important than quantity. In the public sector today, we have large numbers of people, many of whom are barely educated, half educated, and certainly ill-trained and equipped to deliver on the functions of government. We need a public sector that will be able to deliver on programs and policies of government. We don't have that in many islands of the federal government and in many states. We need to energize, professionalize, and compensate public servants to attract the best and brightest. Look at any country in the world doing well. Their best and brightest people, the graduates of Oxford and Cambridge, the graduates of Harvard and Yale, the graduates of Peking University go into public service in their countries. We need to go back to those days when the graduates of the University of Ibadan, University of Ife, Ahmadu Bello, the top graduates of the first universities went into public service. But with the levels of pay we have now, many people prefer to work for oil companies, banks, or telecoms companies. We need to boost the numbers, equipment, and technology in the defense and security sector. We don't have enough police, we don't have enough armed forces, they don't have enough armament and technology, and we need that more than ever, particularly now when we are facing multiple insurgencies across the country. We also need to enhance the machinery of government. We need to undertake a significant review of the machinery and operations of all departments, branches, and tiers of government for effectiveness, efficiency, and transparency. And this means We should aim to have a lean and affordable executive branch with a fully monetized compensation system. Nobody should be getting free housing or free car. We should pay people a salary, a check, and every month they pay for their housing, they pay for their car. We arrange for a consumer finance system so that people can buy a car and pay over some years. People can buy a house and have a 20-year mortgage. That is what we need to do. We need to have less expensive national and state assemblies with lower overheads allowances. And we need a well-functioning, better paid, and less corrupt judicial system. However, what we face, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is not just a fiscal crisis. It is a crisis of economic development. Our country clearly has to cut the cost of governance to have a fighting chance to develop. We have to reduce waste and eliminate fraud, but it is also true that Nigeria as a whole needs to create more wealth in the public and private sectors to enhance the life chances of our people, build human capital, and promote equality of opportunity. The government has to take the lead to help crystallize economic recovery and growth. I've heard the previous speakers talking about spending, sharing. We can only share what we have generated. We can only share what we have made. We need to make a bigger cake to be able to share. The way we are going, we are spending what we don't have, what we have not, the cake that we have not baked, and we may bring the nation to a fiscal cliff, a liquidity crisis, and if nations can go bankrupt, we could take it there. We must raise more revenues. We must find ways to raise more revenues instead of always thinking of spending and sharing. We cannot keep printing money forever. We cannot allow our exchange rate to hit 1,000 naira to the dollar. And it will if we continue to spend without raising revenues. So let me end, because I'm speaking to a federal minister and maybe the VP is online. What should the federal government do? Because as a state governor, I'm limited in what I can do as far as macroeconomic policy is concerned. It is the federal government that should take the lead in doing some of these things and then incentivize the states to line up and do their own bit. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to end guesswork and governance in the dark. We need data to govern. We need to know how many people live in this country. We need to target to complete the biometric capture, identification, and registration of every Nigerian citizen, his address, his occupation, because that is the foundation for raising tax revenues. You cannot tax a person or business that you don't know exists. We need to bring all the databases from vehicle licenses to NIMC to SIM cards. We need to bring them together to have a national database of citizens of Nigeria and what they do and where they live so that we can tax them. That's the one way to raise tax revenues. It is only when you have this kind of data that you can also plan for development, ease security management, and even ensure socio-economic targeting. If you want to target subsidies, if you want to do homegrown school feeding, if you want to do conditional cash transfers, how do you ensure that it is people that are vulnerable that are getting this without data? Most of the time we are guessing, we are governing in the dark. So I think this should be a national priority. We must know how many Nigerians exist, live in Nigeria, those that live outside and what they do. Second, we have an internal security crisis which must be addressed. We must restore internal security and strengthen national defense. We must comprehensively defeat the insurgents and bandits because socio-economic activities nationwide will sooner or later be grounded to a halt unless this is done in the shortest possible time. Thirdly, we need to entrench true federalism. We need to reinstate the elite consensus of 1951 under the McPherson's Constitution. There, our founding fathers agreed that Nigeria will be a true federation consisting of regions, of strong regions and a weak center, with the regions contributing to the pulse to run the center. We've moved from that, we now have 36 states and the FCT, but we can still be a true federation if the APC True Federalism Committee report of 2018 is implemented. And we have talked about that over and over, issues around rule of law, common citizenship, meritocracy, and devolution of powers, moving about 10, 11 items now on the exclusive list to the concurrent list. Items like policing, oil and gas, other than those that are offshore, mines and minerals, railways, prisons, fingerprint and criminal identification records, stamp duties, registration of business names, food, drugs, and poisons other than narcotics, minimum wage. All this should be on the concurrent list. That way, the federal government can set its minimum wage that it can afford, and each state can set its own minimum wage that it can afford, because cost of living differs across Nigeria. Cost of living in Lagos and Rivers is not the same as in Zamfara state. States must be allowed to fix a minimum wage that they can afford. We have a national minimum wage of 30,000, which only 3 states in Nigeria are implementing. 33 states are not in violation of the law. What's the point of making a law that cannot be implemented because of force majeure? The states can't afford it. So we need to look at these issues and be very pragmatic and place responsibility where it will best be taken care of. Decentralization of the judiciary, for instance, and flexibility in the local government system. We need to have a democratic local government system in Nigeria, but it should be flexible, recognizing contextual differences, history, culture, and other peculiarities. Fourth, we need to go back to economic planning and must develop an industrial strategy for our country. This is what China did, this is what Japan did, this is what India did. Every country in the last 50 years that have moved from low income to middle and upper income did so by getting the government to lead in economic development through planning and developing industrial strategy and incentivizing particular sectors that the country has comparative advantage. We must do that. We stopped planning long ago. We've resumed it now, but we need to do longer term plans, 5-year plans regularly, and compel every state government to do the same. That way, the whole country moves forward in the same direction. Number 5, we must realize that oil and gas is not the future. We need to make wise and hard choices about the investment of the revenues from this resource before oil and gas become irrelevant in the global energy marketplace. And this is likely to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. Already, many countries are looking at stopping the production of vehicles that use fossil fuels by 2030. That's 9 years from now. So this is a matter of urgent national importance. We need to move away from that. Number 6, subsidies, targeting, and prioritization. We must abolish unaffordable subsidies and direct resources to areas of national priority. I believe that spending 4 times our national roads budget on subsidizing fuel, or spending 1.6 trillion to bail out a privatized electric power sector needs urgent reconsideration. We've privatized the power sector, yet we are subsidizing to the tune of 1.6 trillion in the last 4 years. It doesn't make any sense at all. Why didn't we just go back and keep NEPA together? Would maybe be spending much less than 1.6 trillion in 4 years. We need to do something about our physical infrastructure deficits. We know the deficit exists. The issue is, how do we finance it? We can address the physical infrastructure deficit, electric power, roads and rail, aviation, etc., by issuing bonds for bankable projects to be financed, to be subscribed by pension fund administrators. We have something like 12, 13 trillion with the pension fund administrators. This is in banks. They are buying bonds. It's working only for the banks, only working for the financial system. Most countries use pension funds as long-term source of funding for infrastructure, for mortgage, and so on. We are not doing it. We are just making money for the investors and the banks and the financial system, and we need to stop that. People are saying you are borrowing from the pensioners' money. It is not, you are not borrowing. They are issuing bonds, and they will get return on that money, and you will not, the bonds will not be subscribed by the pension fund administrator unless they can see clearly that they will get their return on investment and get their capital back. But if you want to build something, you want to build a real system that requires 30 to 40 years payback, there is nowhere you can get such money, apart from the World Bank and pension funds. This is what everyone does across the world. But there is such a high level of illiteracy and misunderstanding of this in Nigeria that people prefer to allow the money to just sit there working for no one. Finally, we must develop human capital. We must develop our ICT capacity, because the whole world is going in the direction of total dependence on Internet of Things, broadband. We must take broadband to every home. We must make wireless broadband available to every citizen of Nigeria. We must do so in the shortest possible time. That's the only way we can remain competitive. We must build human capital, investment in education and healthcare. We must invest in ICT and broadband infrastructure, higher education, secondary and tertiary healthcare. In conclusion, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think that many of the things I've said today are not new. Most Nigerians know this. We have solutions to all these problems. We have had conferences and seminars. We've had research undertaken in universities. All the answers to our problems are there. We don't need any more conferences and seminars to find solutions to our problems. What we need to do is maybe stop any more conferences and seminars and just focus on implementing agreed policies and programs. Let the analysis paralysis stop. We all know what we need to do in Nigeria. The solutions are not difficult. We are not the only country in the world. We are not the only country that has faced these problems. Others have done it. All we need to do is to take what has worked everywhere, somewhere, adapt it to our situation and implement. The key word is implementation, implementation, implementation. We are not implementing. We keep talking and talking and talking, and we don't implement. Happy birthday, my Ogbeni, my Egbon. I admire you greatly. May Allah continue to bless, preserve, protect, and elevate you. Amen. Thank you for listening.
Very big thank you, Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai. Thank you very much. We should turn our future population growth from economic disaster into economic dividends. And of course, you also said Nigerians are becoming despondent. I quickly looked that up in the dictionary, and this is what I found. People being in low spirit, loss of hope and courage. We cannot afford to let that happen. Thank you very much for those contributions you've made and those positions that you've really made very clear. Now is the time to stop analysis paralysis and get into action mode. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we have the opportunity and privilege to listen to Comrade Ali Waba, MNI, the President of the Nigerian Labour Congress, at the 2021 Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola Leadership Colloquium. Comrade.
Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much, sir.
Let me also start from the point of congratulating Rauf Aregbesola, somebody also that have earned the confidence of many Nigerians. Let me also thank His Excellency, the Vice President, for the lead presentation. My entry into this discourse will start from the point of saying that in terms of policy and planning for development in Nigeria, we have had great visions, great policies. In fact, the current policy that have just expired last year, I think, yeah, last year, 2020, was a developmental agenda that has a lot of achievables. I think the major problem we have had including reforms. We have had several reforms, public service reform, many of them uncountable. I think the problem we have had is actually delivering on the objective of those developmental agendas and also those very clear reforms that we have set out. And 20 years into our current democratic experiment, we are still at the same level, raising the same issues and blaming even the victim instead of the victim now blaming those that are responsible. Because me as a citizen and workers will think we are victims, and certainly we cannot be blamed 22 years into this current democratic experience. So I agree with you, this particular issue is a very timely issue because we have not been able to make the progress and development that we ought to have made as a country. And the factors are very obvious. Let me make the point that we must situate all our policy options on the people. And therefore, it must be centered approach. People must be centered approach of any development. And any development must be anchored on fairness, justice, and respect for the rule of law. Anywhere you don't have such ingredients in place, then the issue of development will continue to elude the people. There must also be social justice at the heart of our developmental quest, and importantly, shared prosperity. Yes, we have had serious challenge, and it's because of the fact that we have always tried to adopt some of the microeconomic frameworks that possibly, if you look at the current development agenda, it favors more developing countries than actually developing countries. And therefore, our starting point must look at what have been, yes, it is. And therefore, we must carve for ourselves a development agenda that will address this particular issue that we're in. Centrally is the issue of industrialization. In fact, people discuss about taxation. You don't tax the poor the more. In fact, in other climes, you tax the rich subsidize for the poor. But in our own case, people are looking at the issue of tax where poor will continue to subsidize for the rich. That is not acceptable. What is acceptable is for the rich to subsidize for the poor. And how do you get a tax that can actually also drive the process of development? When we have our industries working optimally, when we have manufacturing working optimally, you are sure that the tax net will then be extended because all those industries will then also provide for the resources that is required to drive development. Let me try to, I think, highlight one major issues that need to be taken on board when we are looking at the issue of development. One is there are clear indices of measuring development globally. Some of those indices are one, the quality of life of the people, the issue of the poverty rates, the quality of the education and access to everybody, quality of healthcare, unemployment rates, in fact, even your life expectancy, and importantly, issue of maternity and infant mortality. Those are some of the indices of measuring development. And therefore, how do we change this negative narrative that have put Nigeria under the flag of underdevelopment? Because in terms of unemployment, Nigeria today is one of the leading countries where you have youth unemployment. In terms of poverty, we have been described as the poverty capital of the world. And in terms of life expectancy, in fact, if you are above 60, you should be able to thank God because we have had many of our infants dying even before the first year. So these are some of the issues that we need to look at. And side by side with that is the issue of infrastructural gap and also human resource for development. Those are the issues that drive development globally. And therefore, let us have a broad mind of discussing the issue of development and how do we confront these issues headlong to be able to change the negative narrative. And that will be my point of entry into the discourse. And therefore, basically also, we must realize the fact that we have had very good policies that have been developed, but the problem has been successive governments have not been able to make sure that they prioritize some of those developmental agendas. And therefore, the first recommendation is to see that the current developmental goal that we are striving to develop should be all-encompassing, and it is. And all successive governments must also key into the developmental agenda. We have seen government come, somebody will come, will say he has 5-point agenda, 4-point agenda, 7-point agenda, but they don't have direct bearing with the developmental plan, either the 5-year developmental plan or even the visions that we have had for the country. And that has been the problem. So it has been disjointed. We're working in silos instead of working in synergy. That has been one of the major issues. And therefore, let us have the commitment that whatever developmental agenda we are producing now, which is on the table right now, let it also be implemented to the latter. Let me look at the issue of how do we address the current physical challenge. Yes, reforms are important, but reforms must have a human face. We have had many reforms. In fact, I remember the last reform, public service reform by Obasanjo, where the issue of monetization came in, the issue of outsourcing of some services came in. Those reforms were carried out, but they were not sustained. In fact, some administration came and re-employed some of those people, and even the policy of monetization have been abused. So how do you then now say it is the worker who is at the receiving end that is responsible for all of this? The other issue is the issue of whether the service is overbloated or not. I want to say that no, the service is not overbloated, because let me speak of the core public service. There is a ratio of every professional group to a particular population. There is a ratio of a doctor to a particular population. The ratio of a nurse to a particular population. Let me tell you that the entire nurses in Nigeria today, they are not more than 120,000. And many of them are leaving the shores of this country in search of greener pasture. So in empirical data terms, I can say that some of those core professionals that are needed to drive the process of development, they are actually not sufficient, and therefore it's not overbloated. I think it's about our priority. How do we prioritize the human resource that we need to drive development? That is the issue. And in doing any reform, we must also respect the law. Reforms are inevitable, but how do you respect the law? Respect the law means there are clear provisions. In fact, on the issue of such reform that will affect human beings, there are clear provisions that need to be respected for those reforms to be meaningful. If not, you create one problem by also addressing a problem. And that is the situation of Nigeria today. Youth unemployment have created another problem. It has created a monster, and the monster is insecurity everywhere. And we are lamenting that there is insecurity in the land. There is a nexus between insecurity and lack of employment or underemployment. And let me tell you, there are two classes of people today in Nigeria. There are those that have gone through the four corners of classroom. They are qualified, they have certificates, but they have no placement because our industries are not working. Today, government is the major employer of labor, be it local government, be it state government, be it the federal government. Why? Because the industries are not working. In one state alone, in fact, recently we are discussing an issue with AIDS, AID. We found out that 500 industries have fallen off. Why? Because of the power sector challenge. So we must centralize our priorities. What drives development all over the world is we have to put in place some infrastructures that will actually drive development. As entrepreneur, as somebody that runs my business, how do I have a favorable environment that can be able to drive my business and I will be able to create wealth? That is what is lacking. That is the disconnect. How do you tell me that the bills that are currently being paid, people should continue to pay? It is the bills, particularly for electricity, is extreme. There is no power, yet people pay. And yet people say we should continue in this direction. Many countries have done electricity reform. Canada recently did one. It failed, and they reversed it. And now they are trying to have a reform that has a human face. This is the way to drive development, not to continue to go in the wrong direction. You are going to Lagos from Maiduguri, and you are finding yourself in Yola. Do you continue in the wrong direction to go to Cameroon? No. The issue is that let us look at the issue. The issue of privatization that we have actually adopted, hook, line, and sinker. We have privatized almost everything. How many of them are working optimally to the benefit of Nigerians? We ended up actually enriching few people. The power sector reform is one of them. We have said after privatization, everything will be El-Dorado. What has been the situation today? Everybody is lamenting. And let me make the facts. Today, through an empirical study, we have found out that 59 countries around the world are still subsidizing energy. Germany, America is one of them. Why? Because energy is central to any developmental policy that a country and people will actually benefit from. So let us not look at all those issues from the prism of saying that we must have a fixated mind. There must be a discourse. And discourse means that everybody's perspective must be taken on board, which is very, very important. And let me also share with us some of the challenges that I think are very obvious. Yes, we have our development impeded because we have not been able to get it right. And why have we not gotten it right? Is because we have not been consistent. And secondly, some of those agendas are also imposed neoliberally. Instead of for us to use programs and policies that will work for us as a country, we are merely trying to just adopt what have worked for other countries. And it has been proven that some of those policies have not worked. One of them, which the VP mentioned, is structural adjustment program, which has impoverished more Nigerians than actually making us to be prosperous. So those are some of the issues. Let's look at also, importantly, the issue of the commanding heights of our economy, the issue of the oil and gas. For 30 years, Nigeria discovered oil, but yet, even to have refining capacity has been a problem. Yet we want to now transfer the inefficiency of the system to the citizens to bear. I saw the recommendation to say that the price of oil should now be increased. Sorry, the price of PMS should now be increased from 163 pump price to 380 or 408 naira. Let us be realistic. Look at all the economic indices, unemployment, poverty, inflation rate, all those stuff. What will be the implication for transferring this efficiency of government, of our system, to the citizens to bear? Because among all the OPEC countries in the world, we are the only country today that is not refining products. Some of our leaders have said that the product should not even sell above 14 naira per liter. Yet we are paying higher. And what is the basis? The basis is because there is a policy of IMF that said Nigeria must continue to use the import parity model to determine our price, which means there will be subsidy. Can't we eliminate even the subsidy? Why should the subsidy be there? Why should Nigerians be paid for what we produce, for what God has given us? It's like you are producing cassava in your farm. Instead of using the cassava, you now sell everything and go to market and try to buy gari. And gari is expensive because a lot of input have gone into the production of gari. That is where we are. And let me return to the model that Aregbesola have used to try to address the issue of inequality in his state. I was there for a study tour when I was at NIPS, that's NIPS, National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. In fact, Osun was my state of visit. And I remembered I visited almost 14 local governments. One of the issues I've seen is people's empowerment economically. He has been able to identify in each of the local governments what is the main stake of their economy. And then he empowered the people. I saw women frying gari. I saw different, importantly in the agro-allied sector. That is what addressed the issue of inequality and also raised the prosperity of the people. This is what we need to do. Yes, you can be giving people support through some intervention, but this is not sustainable because people will then actually relax. They will not be able to be on their own. I think what is important is to recognize trades, small and medium-scale enterprises, where Nigerians can actually fit in and then support them economically so that they can be on their own. They can also be employers of labor. That is what I think will be sustainable and will bring many, many people out of poverty. And we must also have a social security cover. In many countries around the world, everybody has a social security cover. Even if you're a domestic worker, you have a social security cover. Kenya is one of them. And by so doing, even where there are some turbulence, like we have now occasioned by COVID-19, people can be able to have means of living. They will not be destitute in their country. But here we are, people are losing their jobs in thousands, yet there is no provision for them. What do you expect their children to be? Their children will be out of school. And once their children are out of school, they must find something to do because an empty mind is the devil's workshop. And that is what is happening in our polity today. So in addressing the issue of development, it must be holistic. All facets of development must be looked at. It's not just one-sided, which is the capitalist model. No, there must be a social content. even when you are looking at the issues of development. Because what is the primary purpose of governance? One is about the security and welfare of the people. So the issue of social justice is central. And that's why after the First World War, one of the issues that have been proposed is to say that social justice should be at the heart of development, to make sure that there will be peace and development and progress around the world. Those are issues that are very fundamental. And therefore, when we are discussing this issue, we must also have platforms where people can bring their ideas. We can be able to share ideas, share our perspectives. And that's why one of the core conventions that Nigeria have ratified under the ILO is Convention 144, Social Dialogue and Tripartism. On all socio-economic and reforms, it's expected that all shades of opinion should be taken on board to be able to address this issue. And lastly, let me address the issue of the minimum wage, which His Excellency has raised. The minimum wage law is a global standard set by the International Labour Organization, just like all other issues that pertain to the world of work, because people work to earn a living. Minimum wage does not connote payment of the same salary across board. And let me make the point today. All the salary across the 36 states of Nigeria, they are not the same. What is being said is the minimum, which is 30,000. You can't pay below minimum, but you can pay higher, and you can discuss and negotiate the consequential adjustment. In a true federal state like the United States, the minimum wage of $7.25 is still under the exclusive right of the federal. In Germany, which is a federal state, the minimum wage is still under the exclusive of the federal, because minimum wage applies to informal sector, the formal sector of the economy, the private sector of the economy, and also the public sector. So this is the principle behind the so that people cannot be exploited. And this conversation started with Awolowo, and I quoted his quotation in 1959. And those issues are online, where he said, no, it is injustice not to have a national minimum wage, because we go to the same market. And that's why states like Lagos and Port Harcourt can actually enhance it. And that has been the issue, where you have 30,000 minimum wage, some of those states enhance it. So that's the principle. And today, let us even put it side by side with our political elites. What consumes our enormous resources is actually the high cost of governance, which I agree with you. First is that the salary of our political office holders, from councillor to the highest office in the land, which is the governor, all of them are also approved by Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission. If it is about ability to pay, or even federalism, that does not have a global standard. Minimum wage has a global standard, and every one of us can Google, you can see it. So what of that the political elites are earning after serving in a very lucrative office for 4 years? You go with a very humongous severance package, you have houses in many places, and you have pension for life. That is not what is applicable in many countries around the world. But in our country, that is the norm. And nobody sees that as a wrong. Everybody sees it as a right. So basically, we must address those fundamental issues before we can be able to make progress and develop. So in conclusion, I think Nigeria is a country that is blessed. What is happening in Nigeria today, if it's in other climes, in fact, the country will have gone under. But because of the resilience of the Nigerian people, because of our belief in the fact that Nigeria can still be better, that is why today Nigeria is still standing. And our organization, the organization I lead, which is a pan-Nigerian organization where we have every tribe, every religion, every creed is represented under organized labor. We believe that Nigeria can be better, and we can drive a process of development that is all-inclusive. We can also come up with some homegrown solution that can address these developmental challenges that we have had over so many decades of own development. So once again, I wish Aregbesola a very wonderful birthday. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity, and I think we should have more of this conversation. Instead of blaming the victim should have also an opportunity to blame those that are responsible. Because as a victim, I'm a victim as a citizen. As a citizen, I have my minimum expectation from our political elites. Because you can see now what is happening across the country. Yes. Thank you very much. Let me try to take most of our time. I thank you immensely for this opportunity.
Comrade Ayuba, you see, when you talk about being the only pan-Nigerian organization, and I was going to say that aside from the federal government, you know, everybody belongs to labor. So everybody belongs to labor, by the way, because we're labor on behalf of the country. So even Mr. President, belongs to the Labour Congress, because you are representing everyone, including Mr. President, isn't it? Comrade Ali Waba. I said,
Yes.
even Mr. President.
Ayuba Waba, yes.
You represent
I
the
say
interest of
Nigeria
Mr.
because,
President.
yes, I say so because, you know, you have two groups of people, our political elites and we the masses. And therefore, we represent the masses and the working class.
As you represent the citizens of Nigeria as well. Thank you very much. We appreciate the passion with which you spoke. I think some of these issues need to be taken up with the National Assembly, by the way, and I think we can have a very we can have the floor, and that's why we're a democracy, and I will agree. The reason why we're a democracy is that some of these issues could actually go to the floor of the National Assembly and well debated by the elected representatives of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and of everyone. Thank you very much for your contributions. Let's bring the panelists to a close by inviting Mr. Oluseun, who is the co-founder and CEO of Budget. Oluseun, you have the floor for 10 minutes to speak at this Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola's Leadership Colloquium for 2021. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm really, really glad. Thank you, Boasin. First of all, let me say happy birthday to Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, who is, his incredible work in Osun and across the country, and it's also the Minister of Interior. Also, it's great to listen to the Vice President, also the Governor of Kaduna State, Professor Laupa, Comrade Ayuba Waba, and everybody that's spoken, and also the Statistician General, Dr. Yemi Kale. I will have just 10 minutes, and I think I've taken a bit of notes. I think these issues are not new issues, but I'm happy that we're talking about government and big development. And I know we use the word big because we see that there is always this path of rush. There's this urgency to be able to solve Nigeria's problem at once. That means we want to build our roads, we want to build our schools, we want to build our hospitals. We want to change the social dynamics of the country just because we're running out of time. But the first thing we must first understand is that the security and welfare of people is the primary responsibility of government. And I repeat that again, the security and welfare of people is a primary responsibility of government. If you look at budgets across the world, in the US, in the UK, in Kenya, in Ghana, and that the budget reflects that element that you see the funding is for security and also for the welfare. But for a country like Nigeria with a significant infrastructural gap, we've been spending a whole lot of money on one, we're servicing debt significantly, we're paying a whole lot of money to civil servants, and even the capital infrastructure that we have is crowded out by roads, by hospitals, by roads majorly, and rail trains and all of that. But the question is that sustainable? That's the first thing. But one thing that we can do is that in our chase for big development, we must also consider macroeconomic stability. And I know that the VPs talked about debt, that we're raising debt, but we must also look at what's the quality of debt that we're using and what are we using the debt for. We cannot chase development and put debt on a significant burden on the future generation because it's going to affect how we address the country going forward. So I am a big fan of that. We need to first set the macroeconomic stability of the country before we talk about development. And I'm going to explain what are the key pillars. Look at inflation. No matter how much we try today, no matter how much minimum wage we raise today, no matter how much we try to change the dynamics, as long as inflation keeps eating 18, 19, 20%, the entire fund is worthless. No matter how much we try, as long as exchange rate stability, it's not there. And we go from, remember I was always going to Kenya in 2010, 12, it was 80 Kenyan shillings to the dollar. Naira was 160 Naira to the dollar. Now in Kenya is 115. So you have devaluation, minimum devaluation, not less than around 25% devaluation. Nigeria has moved from 160 from that period to around 420 or 485 if you buy market. So in our hunch to push big development and say we're going to take on more debt burden, we must also prioritize that all of this will fall on the cracks if we don't prioritize macroeconomic stability. And I've seen that tension, the tension for us to be able to invest in the communities that we serve and also be able to say we don't have enough revenue. And that there are major things that we have to unbundle here. We have a revenue challenge. We also have an expenditure efficiency problem. Now, so two things can be right at the same time. We don't have enough revenues to service our country. Our revenue to GDP is around 6%. Our taxes to GDP are even less than 5%. So technically, by the time you put it all together, we don't even have sufficient revenue to meet the problems that we have in Nigeria. But if you have too little, you're supposed also to be much more efficient around it. It's as if you have a thin slice of, it's a big dough of bread, and you have a thin slice of butter, and you're trying to spread this very tiny slice of butter on a big dough. It will not work. We are also wasteful in how we make expenditure in Nigeria. And when you look at how even the capital expenditure, we are not disciplined. It's extremely fragmented. And also the contracting level is not been sanitized enough. So, and all of this has destroyed or crumbled the social contract in Nigeria. When people feel the pain of government policies, and we are not even seeing government officials live that kind of life. I mean, you will see that there are no riches in working for government across the world, nothing. You don't become a UK Prime Minister or UK MP and you say you run out of office and become a millionaire or become a multi-billionaire. You are not going to be in the US Congress and you're going to turn out to be a multi-millionaire. It's not going to happen. You might leave office and write books and give speeches and become rich from that kind of system. But that is not what happens in Nigeria. We build a system that only favors the political elite. And we have to really that to elicit trust in Nigeria and rebuild our social contract. Our social contract is broken and trust is gradually being eroded in public service. And that is something that we cannot run away from. We can tell the citizens to bear more burden and by taking more taxes off them. We can say we need to reorganize things, but until we're beginning to show that the political leaders mirror the kind of society that they live, we cannot build trust and we cannot elicit a strong social contract. There are a lot of things that needs to change in Nigeria. And a significant part of that is that we have emphasized a lot on distribution rather than put priority on productivity. And that is the big existential question for Nigeria. How do we emphasize productivity in this country? And that is even the fundamental conversation around restructuring as we see right now. Everybody goes to the center and takes something, but nobody has asked that question. In the same way we look at the distribution matrix, what do you contribute to the center? Why are you taking from places that you are not contributing from? And that has to be fundamental for how we restructure the country. We've talked about VAT. Why do we have the same VAT across the country? We've talked about even payee. Why is a payee the same across the country when we know that states across the world always make adjustments for payee to incentivize businesses? Look at the company income tax. A company income tax for a new company for a state government that facilitates a new company, Ogun. It's the same company. It's also divided by population. So you don't even get any incentive for bringing a company into your territory because the company income taxes is shared on the basis of population. There are fundamental questions that we need to answer that will have to eat at how do we enhance productivity in Nigeria and not just favor distribution. And until we're able to face that entirely and we're able to and invest in it, and I mean, when I say productivity, it will not happen suddenly. We will not expect states to grow in leaps and bounds suddenly. We also need to support these states to invest in them and to be able to be productive, to reindustrialize them if we have to invest in power, infrastructure, to get them to get on board. And hopefully we can get visionary governors and people who can lead their states in a much more better way. I made a point recently that it's easier for a state governor to borrow a lot of money and build shining infrastructure, but we also have to start looking at state governors from the point of how much investment can you bring to your state? How are you deepening the private sector within your state? Because if you are saying you want more PE and you want more taxes, you can't take that off the poor in a significant way, because those who are poor already do not need another extra burden on themselves. We need a situation where we can industrialize states, bring more formal work system, formal businesses into the system, and on the basis of that, you're not able to get more taxes. So the core of governance in Nigeria, in my own view, is we must put security, welfare, and how do we expand the middle class significantly? Because every single country that you find, when it talks about taxes, the crux of the taxes might come a bit from the rich, but it is the volume of the middle class that actually transforms everything in the long run. In Nigeria, I believe that everything in Nigeria is relatively small. And I mean by everything is small. By the time you look at our production to per capita, our production to GDP is small. By the time you look at our personnel, like Comrade Ayuba mentioned, our doctors, our workers, our teachers, relatively to the size of the population, small. Look at our police, relative to the size of population, it's not revenue, even expenditure. But even if you say the federal government budget is 20 trillion naira today, in comparing that to the GDP or to the population that we have, it's still relatively small. So everything looks small, but we still need a lot of rearrangement for efficiency. And because the way we're running Nigeria right now, it is grossly unsustainable until we make some hard changes, which brings me to my last question, my last point about we need a lot of boldness in leadership to take the hard decisions. And those are the boldness that we require, because they are going to eat hard at the existential questions of Nigeria. Existential questions around taxation, existential questions around wage structure, essential questions around even the feel and the look and the presentation of the political elite, education, health. All of these are things that we would have to face with boldness. What Nigeria does is Nigeria talks about its problems, but refuses to face its challenges and its issues with boldness and courage and leadership. And that question will be something that we must bring honesty and trust to the table. And there is no, the governor of Kaduna State mentioned that we have over 700 MDs. We don't need 700 MDs at the federal government. If we have to reorganize that so that we can put more money for education, move more money for health, yes, we would have to do that. If it means that we're going to take all money and ring fence it for capital development and intergeneration fund, yes, we have to do that. But we are not going to change Nigeria by just continuing this current pace and without asking our existential questions. And for me, the big development that we seek will have to be funded, will have to be financed. And there is no better way to finance our big development than being able to tax the people that are going to benefit from this big development. And for us to be able to tax people, we might be asking the wrong question. The big development that we see will come out of growth. Nigeria has to grow its economy. And if we don't grow the economy, we are not going to get big development. And that growth has to be sustainable, it has to be even, it has to be equitable, which means we have to be deliberate about Nigeria not being at 2%, 1.5% growth. There is no big development coming around that. If we take the debt route and we force a big development to happen, in the long term, it will not still work out because it will generate significant macroeconomic stability. So I will leave my point at this point and say thank you so much, everybody who's been part of this. I've been just given 10 minutes and I want to stay by that. And I want to wish the celebrant much more fruitful years. And I want to thank everyone that's invited me to this colloquium. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very incisive and very short, straight to the point, and well-loaded delivery. Thank you very much. The bold decisions we need to face. We need to tackle our challenges. We talk a whole lot about our problems, but we need to fix the solutions to them. And again, it's all about cohesive national development, by the way, because you can't really clap with one hand, as that very popular saying goes by the late politician M.K. Abiola. So we need the executive branch, we need the legislature, we need the civil society as well. And I think this is where it all comes together for us to be able to have that big development, but not just very big highways or big bridges, but again, development, big development, like all of you have pointed out, at the healthcare level, at education level, at social infrastructure level, at the basic level that makes life meaningful to Nigerians. And through that, we can raise the middle class a whole lot bigger, we can collect a whole more taxes, and we can deliver long life and prosperity, including longevity, and reduce our misery index to Nigerians. Thank you very much, all of you, my panelists, for being on the program today. I have this very little joke when we talk about poverty in Nigeria and poverty in advanced economies, and which speaks to our social development. For example, I said, if you have to sleep under the bridge, would you prefer under a Lagos bridge, a Ibadan bridge, or anyone in maybe whatever, than the one in Kano, in Germany, in France, or in the UK? So the man who sleeps on the streets under the bridge in Germany or France is sleeping under a better bridge than the one who is sleeping under a bridge in Nigeria. So how can we make our under bridge in Lagos, in Ibadan, in Port Harcourt, in Kano, much better and finer than what we have, like the one you had overseas in developed economies? And that speaks to our development, in which even if you have to be a homeless person, you will have a very decent place. There will be security, CCTV cameras. Your life is protected by law, by police, even if you are looking for what to eat on the roadside. That level of development is the big development that brings social cohesion and everything in. Thank you very much. We've highlighted all the problems, and I thank you very much all for bringing some of the solutions to bear on this. Let me just take a few questions, if you permit me, within the time left for this colloquium to speak, and then some of these questions will go to our panelists, as it were, and I'm going to ask a few of them, and I hope that His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai, is still on the panel. Dr. Yemi Kale, you're still there? Yes, I can see you still in the room. So let me ask this question from Wale Bola Unduro, for example. Why is it that we haven't seen much linkage between data on GDP and the revenue, which could help policymakers to target revenue growth, both at national and subnational level? Dr. Kale, you want to take that very quickly, please?
Okay, thank you, Bosan. I think we have to understand the components of GDP. Now, if you break GDP into the formal and informal sector, the informal sector represents about 45% of your GDP. Now, that informal sector that represents almost half of your GDP. By the way, about half of the Nigerian GDP is bigger than all but 5 or 6 countries in Africa. So that's a huge portion of that GDP that has not been taxed because it's informal. And that's another reason. So no matter what you do, your tax revenue is coming likely from the formal sector. That's the first side. So there's a huge, so you will never get a tax to GDP ratio much higher than that, because you have half of your economy is not even taxed at all, because they're not even recognized. Secondly, when you take into consideration the fact that about 90%, over 90% of businesses operating in Nigeria are micro, small businesses. We have a policy generating annual revenues that are actually below the minimum taxable revenue by law. So you have millions and millions of businesses, very small micro businesses that generate revenues, but by law, the revenues they generate are below the total revenues that you can't even be taxed. So you have a huge economy that cannot be taxed because the law does not allow you to tax them. So combination of both things, you would struggle to get a more, in addition to the inefficiency in tax revenue from those that are even identified, the combination of those three, you'll find a situation where it's difficult to get a better tax to
I think we're losing you there momentarily.
Yeah, please proceed, Dr. Kale. Looks like we lost Boasa for a second. Please just bear with us while we get the host back. Slight technical glitch from his end will be sorted ASAP. Dr. Yemi Kale, are you done with responding to the question, or do you want to quickly wrap up?
I think, well, I'm not sure if I was heard, but I think that basically answers the question. The fact that you have a very large informal sector, about half of the economy is informal and is outside the ability of the authorities to tax, in addition to the fact that over 90% of all businesses in Nigeria are micro, and their annual revenues usually fall below the minimum by law set for you to tax. So once that is, when you have such a huge economy outside the tax net, then it's difficult for you to improve your tax to GDP ratio, because you have all these businesses and those are excluded from taxes. I think that's basically summarized everything I want to say.
Dr. Yemi Kale, thank you so much. I was about asking Comrade Ayuba Waba, MNI, to speak very quickly to Dr. Kale. Please, could you please hang in there for a second, because Comrade Ayuba spoke about the number of nurses in Nigeria, for example, or health professionals that we have. Do we have data that we can use to measure to really have the right number of nurses, we have the adequate number of teachers in Nigeria relative to the size of the population? Is this something we can work on? Can we get it done? Help us with big development.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, please, may I just allow Dr. Yemi Kale to speak first. Comrade, please.
The data on total number of nurses and teachers and so on, that data does exist. The data, if you're trying to relate that to the data on population, well, you have to use the estimates that the Population Commission gives us, and that's not something that is within the control of the MBS. But in terms of the number of teachers, number of nurses, and so on, we definitely do have that number. And if we hold the estimates of the Population Commission constant, and yes, we do have that, we can actually generate that ratio of teachers to the population and so on across the different states and across the nation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yemi Kale. Comrade Ayuba Waba, you want to say a few words for just a minute very quickly on why this data analysis is very important? You spoke about earlier.
This data analysis is very, very important because they also drive development. In some climes where you have the best level of education, like Finland, they have 4 teachers in one classroom of not more than 30 pupils. And basically, all our regulatory agencies, they have this data. Like the one I said about nurses that are less than 120,000, you can get from Nursing and Midwifery Council. That of the doctors, you can get it from Medical and Dental Council. So all those data are already available. Those are data we work with every day. And therefore, you can also put it side by side with the population of a state, how many nurses they have, or of a country at large. All of this can be done. In many of our local government, we don't have even doctors or nurses in many of the health facilities. So basically, those data are available. And those are the indices that are used actually to measure development. They are very key, they are important. So we must actually use them to be able to also discuss the issues of development.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. We're getting to the point in which we will have a few more other questions are coming through. Osun State, we have Oladayo Afolabi is talking about state of Osun, at least it's the pace. How do we think we could move forward when looking at a stable macroeconomic before we engage in infrastructure? Would any Professor, can you look at this question for me? Are you still in the room? Professor Laupa, please.
I didn't quite get that.
Yes, I was looking at this. How can we, if we wait until we have a stable macroeconomy before we engage in infrastructure? One of the participants, Oladayo Afolabi, says he doesn't think we're going to move an inch if we wait until we have macroeconomy, stable macroeconomy, before we engage in infrastructure. So, His Excellency, Rauf Aregbesola, when he was the governor of the state of Osun, was able to work on virtually all the sector and move Osun State forward. So the question from this participant is, how do you think we can move forward if we have to, we can do which work for stable macroeconomy, then we engage in infrastructure. How can we ride both at the same time?
Well, the issue of infrastructure development is a question of a lot to do with financing gap, which is challenging the capacity of budget-driven infrastructure development. I agree with you that, of course, we need to continue to capacitate the industry, the private sector, the productive sector, so that they can deliver the taxes, the returns that also can feed into, addressing the infrastructure, the financing gap in order to be able to deliver infrastructure. But I think the critical challenge for Nigeria, given the huge financial gap to deliver on the National Infrastructure Master Plan, is the need for creativity and innovativeness. We are not doing too well in terms of being able to leverage on public-private partnerships and being able to, attract the right kind, the balanced kind of funding from other sources. Also due to the, and I think the point has also been made. In order to be able to address the infrastructure gap, we will need to continue to borrow. But our debt is meaningful if the return on investment is reasonable. We cannot be borrowing and spending business as usual in terms of project management, in terms of contract implementation and all. So really, we need to have value for money in terms of being able to utilize, available funding from varied sources in order to drive the infrastructure development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olauka. Very quick question to you. Shewoni Bide from Wale Boloruduro. We want to ask one or two questions of His Excellency, Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam El-Rufai. But let me give you this very quickly. How can we use Wale Boloruduro? How can we use data gathered and presented by your organization to evaluate state performances? Will it be proper to define performance criteria such as debt sustainability and so on, and rate states based on the criteria rather than their debt to revenue alone?
Thank you so much. And I think when we talk about ranking states, we have to look at it as a broad spectrum. One single index can be enough. So budget does what they call the fiscal sustainability index, where you say that how the way the state is being run, how can it continue to sustain itself? And it's very important because the current structure that we are running, the current fact sharing structure, would not be forever. At a point, we also have to start looking at states at how much internal revenues do they have, and what's the impact of that on their recurrent operations. If we stop sharing fact money as it is today, can they stand on themselves? And also, Governor Nasir, if I mentioned that point, that the state government should run effectively on its internal taxes. That should be the standard, so that you can reinvest revenue from oil and all the for intergenerational equity. But also other indexes are critical. One thing that's been touted recently has been a state attractive index, and I think a group like STS is planning to work on that. Also, we also have to look at how much states are able to attract investment in the state. How are they ready for business? There's also a World Bank index on ease of doing business. How do states position themselves for attracting private capital, and other indexes like poverty and faith. So one single index would not be enough. But I think what we can do as a state is to take the positive and the negative from whatever index that we have and know that this is how we are able to make adjustment as cross board. One thing that is big on my mind is that when we talk about big development, we cannot remove the more fundamental elements that we have to prioritize investment in people. We will not get, if we don't invest in people, we are not going to reap the returns. And that investment in people means that we put education, we put healthcare, economic support to state. When government look at big development, a lot of them are looking at legacies in terms of how much roads did I build, how much bridges did I build, how much so that people look at it and say, wow, it happened in your time. It's proven over time, and Mr. Bill Gates also referenced that in his speech, that we need to prioritize investment in people. How do we turn our population to assets? And I think that should be the fundamental thing. And the second point also that we can change the landmark a bit is we need to put all our cards on the table and have this mutual conversation. And that conversation, because there are no fools here. I mean, labor should be on that table, civil society, I mean, private businesses, government. They say, this is who we are. This is the state of finances of this country. And everybody able to sit down and say, these are adjustments that we have to make for us to have a much more sustainable country. And that adjustment will be on both sides so that we can elicit trust. So that's the way I'm going to put it at this point, that every index is important. Every index is important, is useful for what it is, but we must take what is right from every single point. For example, a state like Ogun has done well previously in terms of raising IGR, and because it's taken that benefit of being proximate to Lagos to build the industrial conurbation. We can do the same thing within the Oyo and Osun, to sit in and say, how do you raise IGR based on the size of consumption that happens in Lagos? And those are the key questions that we have. Everybody must sit down, think through inwardly and say, how do I either take advantage of the domestic consumption, or how do I propose myself for exports? And these are things that will not happen suddenly. Let's be honest with yourself. Will require persistence. It's like a marathon, a 6 to 8 year plan that is full of dedication, can transform things significantly. Thank you.
8 years work, full of dedication. That is it, and focus, consistency, and continuity. Thank you, Olusegun Onibide. One of our participants is asking very important question. If you look at the growth in the GDP, mainly from agriculture, the incentive has been mainly from the monetary side and less from the fiscal and trade policy makers. What are we doing at the National Economic Council level on fiscal sides, on agriculture and other growth sector? Who do I direct this? Let me give this to, I guess we have an outtake from Comrade Ayuba Waba's location. Professor Lauka, let me give you this very quickly. How do you think we can deliver more from the fiscal and trade policy side rather than just monetary side? Big development.
Delivering from the fiscal side, if I get the question right, is more about how we can utilize policy instruments to create the right kind of incentives in the economy. How can we, offer the right kind of support to SMEs? How can we provide the kind of, I think the basic issue on the fiscal side for production and productivity in the economy is the cost of doing business. And that ultimately takes us to infrastructure and the quality of support that a business provide. Then the cost of raising funds and all that. Then it also bounces back to the fact which we have been talking about, that's that in terms of government intervention, how much of impact government investment and programs having, on the rank and file. And also we need to look at the whole issue of resource capture. We have done a lot of welfare projects and the whole issue of which have been a little controversial in terms of how that gets to the target beneficiary and the kind of impact that have been generally. So this is a conversation for core economists, but that will be my own input to that conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and your contribution, Professor Olaokwa. Quite a number of the conversation also today had been around fiscal federalism, how to balance a whole number of issues. And I think a number of these can also go to will have to go to the National Assembly for us to handle. Comrade Ayuba, are you still on the line? You can use your audio to speak to us. So thank you very much, Comrade. I was just about to ask you how much of these issues that has to do between the state, the civil service, and federal should go to the National Assembly for proper handling to enable us to move forward very quickly, because sometimes it looks like there are red wires or red lines crossed between parties here, between the civil society group and the government at some level.
Well, thank you very much. I think Labour is actually in synergy with most civil society organizations. And we have been working together with them in many, many aspects of development. And some of those reforms, the electoral reform and many reforms going on, we have been working with key civil society organizations. But I think about the structure of our civil service and also how to make it effective. That of the federal have to be driven through the structures of the Joint Public Service Negotiating Council. We have a structure that deals with the federal civil service, and so also it is in many of the states. But in most cases, I think the challenge has been lack of consistency in our policy options. Policy options, I mean that some policies will be taken even before they are implemented. They are actually changed by subsequent government. So there have been a lot of policy somersault, and including the issue of recruitment into the service. You find out that there are clear provisions about how people can be recruited in the service, including having the best hands. But because of certain factors which are very evident in our Nigerian polity, we don't bring in the best hand. People bring in those that are very close to them, or it's about who you know that comes into the service. And that has been the problem of also our development. In key and commanding heights of our economy, in other climes, they have their best, actually leading those commanding heights of the economy. And you can see a lot of policy options that are working. But in our case, because our political experiment dispensation is about who actually is related to either the person appointing or something of that nature. So that actually also, it's one of the issues. We need to put square pegs in square holes or round pegs in round holes if we are actually also to move forward. This issue of how to select our best have become a problem. And I think that is what we need to emphasize. Even within states, we need to look at all of this. We have a lot of Nigerian intellectuals that are making waves around the world. But sometimes when we are outside this country, people ask us, why can't you bring such people to fix your economy, fix your security? And we don't have an answer to give them. It's because they are not given the opportunity. It's not that we don't have the best. We have the best. So it's for them to be given opportunity. And I don't know how that will work, but I think it's a major problem that we are having. Take, for instance, the issue we discussed about devaluation. Devaluation of power, I agree with you. There are some issues that are under the federal list. Take, for instance, agriculture. Land belongs to the local government. Even states, I don't think they should have a say in agriculture. It should go directly to the local government. Federal government should do supervision. Even the states, if you want to have meaningful agriculture and encourage private sector entrepreneurs to come in. I think that is how our economy is going to work, but not this whole issue of having many things at the center. But we need to prioritize some of those things, and there must be a consensus around what we want to do, not just one dogmated approach to say, no, except you go this way or it will not work. No, I don't think that is how to build consensus. Thank you.
Very, very, very valid point. Very valid point about agriculture, for example. I agree. It needs to go to the local government. That's where the land is. That's where the people is. That's where everything is. Just supervise and let development begin to take place at a grassroots level. And I think that was part of what has been said by Mr. Vice President, His Excellency, Professor Yemi about how Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, what he did when he was in Osun State, trying to catalyze some of this development, rather than sitting down in Osogbo, which is the state capital, just take it all, come down to the local government, and you can see how you can open up the whole state, that even with very less inflow from outside, they were able to stay ahead of poverty rate in the entire Federal Republic. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for contributing. I think we have come to the point in which I need to invite the celebrant, and Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola himself, who was the Honorable Minister of the Interior of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the former fourth civilian governor of the state of Osun, to speak with us. He understands works, he understands infrastructure, he understands agriculture, and I think those are part of the key basic ingredients of the big development we're looking for in Nigeria, either both on the human capital side and on the brick and mortar side. Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, I have the singular honor and privilege to invite you to speak to us and to formally give us the closing words of this 2021 edition of your leadership colloquium in your honor. You have the floor, please, and our attention.
Thank you. I must thank everybody, first of all. I must thank you, Kosan. I must thank all those who have greatly enriched this exercise in a way that no one had ever imagined. We are grateful. But my first gratitude must go to the president for the opportunity to even serve the nation and have the means of garnering so much attention and interest in a colloquium that is meant to mark my birthday. So, President Muhammadu Buhari, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. As I do thank all those who have supported my development from school to public life, and those who are supporting me still, even now, I'm grateful. There is no way I can say this without thanking the Vice President, who indeed has been a major partner in our effort to build a viable, successful, committed, dedicated, and humane society that will be a leading light in the continent of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. I thank Governor Nasir El-Rufai for his never-failing motivation. I thank all the other participants, Comrade Professor Laopa, Kale, for his own intellectual and didactic contribution. Onibinde, thank you. My little addition to what has been said, while one must appreciate the effort that must have gone into the presentation of all the panelists, my own addition is just simple. Unarmed consumption will lead to tragedy, without a doubt. So, focusing on the people as the means of developing or building a sustainable and dependable economy is the way out. If we just consume out of context of productivity, because it is a people mobilized to work that can have enough to consume, both for physical development, for leisure and recreation. And the bane of our society so far has been mindless consumption of a tiny few to the detriment and pain of a majority of people who wallow in misery and poverty. So we must focus on mobilizing the majority of our people to work. Engagement of the majority for productivity or production is, to me, the way out of the quagmire we find ourselves. It's been said by virtually all the panelists in different ways, which is about to, saying that there might be varied strategies, but the focus is the same. Let us get our people to work. If we can get our people to work, definitely we shall be rich. And once we are rich, then the method of distribution that will reduce the huge gap, the scandalous gap between the people of means and those who are struggling will be totally eliminated. Once we do that, then we will have the nation that will be the torchbearer for the people of our race worldwide, starting from the continent of Africa. I thank all of you for this opportunity. and the inspiration and motivation that this colloquium to me signifies and contains. I'm grateful. Thank you.
A very big applause to you, the Honorable Minister of Interior of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola. Thank you very much, the fourth civilian governor of the state of Osun. Thank you very much for giving us those very few words. And of course, I just put out a few notes. Mobilize the majority for productivity. And I think that's the underlying point here. How do we mobilize the majority for productivity? Then we can discuss the distribution. Right now, it looks like we're spending so much more time discussing distribution rather than the productivity. In the middle of that, the majority are falling through into poverty and they're not being mobilized into productivity. And that is a big problem. So we need to walk our way back, in the manner of speaking, and get our way back to where we discuss more about productivity and the mobilization of the people so that they can have hope, so that they can have courage, so that despondency will no longer be the part that is now holding Nigerians hostage. And then we can deal with insecurity and a lot of other issues. Thank you so much. Let me begin to say a thank you and to wrap it up at this point. First and foremost, to His Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Osinbajo, who has to leave the summit, this colloquium, at a very important point to attend to other matters of national importance. Thank you very much. On behalf of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, we say thank you, Mr. Vice President, and please convey thank you and a very big appreciation to Mr. President, His Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic, President Muhammadu Buhari, on behalf of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, for allowing you in. We also appreciate Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Mallam Nasir El-Rufai. Very important points you've raised, and of course, very important as well, Comrade Ayuba Waba, MNI, who is the President of the Nigeria Labour Congress. We appreciate your being here today and being part of this very important colloquium. Professor Laokwa, thank you very much from Ibadan. You brought a whole lot into government and public policy to bear your suggestions. All of this will be harvested, as we always do at the end of the colloquium, and spread it across not just the civil society, but the private sector and the public sector as well. Thank you very much. Dr. Yemi Kale, the Statistician General and the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics, thank you very much. Data is king. Bring data to the table. In God I trust, but everything else is data. And every data I verify. That's the saying, as the saying goes, without data, there's governance in the dark. That's taking it from you, Ayuba Waba. We need to come to the end of governing in darkness. We need to know how many we are. We need to use data to put light into where we need good government, big government, and whether we have enough size of government and how we reduce and manage the cost of governance. Thank you very much, Dr. Yemi Kale, for all that you're doing as well. Thank you very much, Olusegun Onibide, the co-founder and the head of a budget Nigeria. Thank you so much for coming through. Despite all your busy schedules and working hard throughout the week, taking 3 hours out of your time on a Saturday is a great privilege. On behalf of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, I say thank you to you, Seun Onibide, and others. Thank you very much as well to other panelists and contributors and those who sent questions, and to all the participants here in Nigeria and hundreds and thousands of you more around the world who have stayed through the 3 hours of this particular colloquium. On behalf of the organizers and on behalf of our chief host, Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, thank you very much, everyone, for coming through today. And I look forward to our engagement and moving forward in the days ahead. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you very much, and bye for now. Thank you, everyone.